Hi again, this is Robin with Chapter 9 Talk Through for Adolescent Development, FHS 1230. And our topic today is autonomy. Autonomy is super important in establishing your own identity. Autonomy is like um, independence and being on your own and being able to take care of yourself. We have a new vocabulary word called paradox, which I'm sure you've heard about before. But a paradox is like a sentence or two sentences that are like seem to contradict each other. But then when someone explains it, you're like, oh, yeah, okay. So paradox is your vocabulary word. Let's do some examples, some typical paradoxes. The only certainty in life is that nothing is ever certain. That's paradox. The more available something is, the less you want it. You want to live somewhere else, but there's no place like home. So that's kind of getting us in the thought processes of paradox. We do have paradoxes of adolescent autonomy, which means you're going to have two parts of a sentence that seem to contradict each other, but they really don't when you think about them and explain them. Adolescence is longer nowadays. So because it's longer, you might think more people would get independent by the end of it, but we still are not totally independent at the end of adolescence. Adolescents are expected to be independent in all areas, but then we're really not economically at this time in our culture. So kind of interesting. There are three types of autonomy. In emotional autonomy, and we'll talk about each of these, but just kind of to get the general feeling, emotional autonomy is changes in relationships, especially relationships with your parents. Behavioral autonomy is when you can make independent decisions and follow through. Sometimes we have trouble following through, some people. Cognitive autonomy is when you have independent values, opinions, and beliefs. So you can see all of these are parts of you that need to grow independent during adolescence. And of course, sometimes they're not totally resolved right away. Let's look at emotional autonomy. Now, if you remember in the slide before, emotional autonomy is the changes in your relationships, especially with your parents. So it's kind of like you're going to move away from your parents, become independent. Um, One thing to remember is all kinds of autonomy um, change throughout your lifespan. You don't necessarily just like arrive and then you're there. Um, and sometimes they change depending on the situation too. And sometimes again they aren't resolved all the time in adolescence. Sometimes it goes on for a little bit. So let's look at this emotional autonomy. Changes in relationships, especially with your parents. Now, as an adolescent, you don't tend to rush to your parents when you're upset or in need as much, which means, of course, you're not as dependent on them. You don't see your parents anymore as all-knowing or all-powerful beings, that if you ask them, they'll give you the correct answer and it's the right one, and it's the only right one. You can see parents as real people. This is where you can understand when they've had a bad day, or you understand that your mom does not feel like cooking today, that type of thing. That they are real people with real issues and real feelings. And sometimes that's quite an eye-opener for people. And you have emotions wrapped up with people other than your family. Like you have friends and you have emotions wrapped up with your friendships. You have a boy or a girlfriend, you get emotionally wrapped up there. So your emotions are in more places than they were before you were an adolescent. And I find that quite interesting also. Let's look at parenting styles. Remember, was it chapter 4, I think? We talked about authoritarian parent styles, and that's your most effective, right? It's a child-centered, more democratic, where you have rules and you're responsive and you encourage independence and autonomy. Why would this type of parenting be good for an adolescent? I want you to think about that. And when I ask you questions, of course, I can't hear your answers, but I hope that you're at least thinking about it. You know, in times when you're learning to be independent, I think this type of parenting would be helpful in helping you get there. How might a teen react if you had been a permissive parent and now you go, oh gosh, we got to follow rules now. They're a teenager, they're getting out of hand. Let's crack down on the rules. Well, I don't think it would be received very well by a teenager that you just let them run wild and now all of a sudden you want them to conform to what you want them to do. You know that they're going to distance themselves from the parent, probably withdraw from your whole family. It's like, whoa, this is exactly the opposite of what I've been living this whole time. And I don't think the teen would go, oh, okay, I'll follow every one of your rules. They'll probably resist the rules. And he probably will spend more time away from home doing activities that probably are not beneficial. Let's think about how your decision making may change in adolescence. In pre-adolescence, how did you make decisions? What did you think about when there were decisions to be made? And now, how do adolescents make decisions? What types of decisions will adolescents make without help? And what types of decisions will adolescents go to an expert for advice? Well, let's look at these 4 questions. When you're a pre-adolescent, your decisions were not usually your own. You look to an authority figure, the teacher, to tell you what to do or to tell you it's okay to be independent. It's okay to be spontaneous. It's okay to do this art project however you want. But they're very comfortable at asking for confirmation on things. Now, adolescents, now you have multiple views of things. You're able to compare different perspectives. You're thinking, well, what would happen if I did this? What would happen if I did that? So the decision making is more of a thought process than it ever was. And we think that adolescents will typically make simple decisions without help, like what color am I going to paint my bedroom wall? You know, what am I going to wear to school today? Sometimes you get friends involved depending on if they're available and if you feel like that's what you need. But decisions that adolescents will go to an expert for advice, think about what kind of stuff would adolescents be thinking of? Mostly decisions about after high school, what do I do? Do I go to college? If I want to go to college, now what do I do? You know, you're not in college because you sat there and waited for it to come to you. And then you had to choose a college. Those are all things that I believe adolescents will realize that they don't know. And so they go places that have experts for advice. Sometimes it's Google, sometimes it's a person. Let's look at peer pressure and how susceptible people are to it. We all know that peers influence adolescents. That's not an issue. But if you have a situation where parents and your peers give you different advice, who do you follow? And what type of adolescent is most susceptible to peer pressure? Kind of interesting. You would think it would be the unsupervised teen, and they get involved with negative activities with their friends, and they are most susceptible to peer pressure, which is true. In the situation where parents and peers give different advice, depends on the situation, depends on the relationship, and depends on the kid, the adolescent. Okay, but again, the one most susceptible to peer pressure is when they're unsupervised. And I always thought about when did I get in the most trouble? It was after school when I didn't have other things going on, when I was unsupervised. Okay, let's look at moral development. Here is a situation that I'm sure you've heard of before. It's kind of a moral dilemma, and it was about a man named Heinz and his wife. And I'm going to read it to you, even though you may have already heard some version of it. A woman was near death from a special kind of cancer. There was one drug that the doctors thought might save her. It was a form of radium that a druggist in the same town had recently discovered. The drug was expensive to make, but the druggist was charging 10 times what the drug cost him to produce. He paid $200 for the radium and charged $2,000 for a small dose of the drug. The sick woman's husband, Heinz, went to everyone he knew to borrow the money, but he could only get together about $1,000, which is half of what it cost. He told the druggist that his wife was dying and asked him to sell it cheaper or let him pay later. But the druggist said, "No, I discovered the drug and I'm going to charge whatever I can get for it." So Heinz got desperate, broke into the man's shop, and stole the drug for his wife. So that's the situation. Interestingly enough, scientists don't care what you answered, but they're more interested in why. Okay, so then we look at a man named Kohlberg who came up with these stages of moral development. Again, it kind of depends more on why you say what you did. Okay, stage one is obedience, and it tends to be the younger children, but not always. And they say you should be obedient to the laws. Heinz should not steal the medicine because he'll be put in prison. So that's why you want to do the right thing. Stage two is when you think of your self-interest. So they would say something like, Heinz should steal the medicine because he'll be happier if he saves his wife, even if he has to go to prison for a little while. Stage three is conformity. He should steal the medicine because his wife expects him to, and he needs to be a good husband, and that's what a good husband would do. So see, you're conforming to what society, or what you think society thinks. Stage four is law and order. He should not steal the medicine because it's against the law to steal. Stage five, which is human rights. Heinz should steal the medicine because everyone has the right to choose to live regardless of the law. Or they might say, Heinz should not steal the medicine because the scientist has a right to charge whatever he wants. Stage six is universal human ethics. Heinz should steal the medicine because saving a human life is a more fundamental value than the property rights of another person. Or Heinz should not steal the medicine because others may need the medicine just as badly as his wife, and their lives are equally significant. And so wherever you answered, whatever you answered, and giving the reasons why would put you in one of these 6 stages. And, you know, the stages have been criticized for different things, and we're not really going to go over all the whys. But if you're interested in that, just Google Kohlberg stages of moral development, and you'll get, you know, a million articles or so. But the thing I want you to remember on this one is your lower levels would be they don't do antisocial acts. So pretty much they're going to conform to society, conform to the rules, do what you're supposed to be doing. Um, they would be accepting if someone was misbehaving, in other words, behaving in the way you don't think is right. But if they are following society's rules, then you're okay. Now, as you get into your upper levels, then you're more tolerant of diverse thinking. So you would say, even if you think he shouldn't steal it, if someone said he should and gives a good reason, then you're okay with that. Um, and and people who are in the latter stages are more influential with others. In other words, they're happy to explain and they understand why they think the way they think, and they're happy to tell other people about it. It's kind of an interesting idea that you move through these stages and you can back up, you can do 2 or 3 stages at the same time, that type of thing. It's just pretty interesting how people uh, develop their morals. One interesting thing is pro-social reasoning. Now, when you think of pro-social, this would be another vocabulary word for you. It's defined as behavior through which people benefit other people. So you're not looking for something to make yourself more popular, or you're doing something to help someone else. And adolescents value pro-social acts if they're done out of empathy because they want to do them, not because someone's going to get a reward for it or get a certain number of points, or it's a class assignment or something like that. Um, when people volunteer, adolescents respect that, especially like coaches and people who volunteer without thinking of any reward for themselves. Volunteering increases social responsibility, makes adolescents more aware of what's going on in the world right around them. It increases a commitment to tolerance, equality, and to value helping other people. So you want to, as you volunteer more, you get out in the community, I think it maybe just opens your eyes to the different people that are out there. I think if you think about how your view of the world has expanded from elementary school, where it was just kind of your little neighborhood. And then when you went to junior high, there were lots of neighborhoods. You went to high school, there was a whole, geographic area. And when you went to college, it really expanded because there are people from all over the world. And I think that type of thing opens your eyes um, to helping others and understanding where other people come from. Political reasoning. If adolescents value pro-social behaviors, why is there such an apathy toward politics? Your age group, if you're, just voting like 18 to 26 kind of thing, is the lowest voting percent of voting people, and it has been across the ages. I'm not really sure why people are apathetic. Do you? One theory is there's a conflict between hypothetical situations and actual situations. Adolescents know a politician can promise you anything, but what they actually do, you don't know. And I think that's a thing with adults also. We're watching, different ones now for our senator, different ads, and one badmouths the other and tells how wonderful they are, and then, back and forth. And we think, yeah, you say that you'll stand for us when you're in Washington, but what do you really do? And so I think especially adolescents are like, well, it's just not worth voting. Um, Scientists also were thinking that if you get involved in your local community, that will help you curb the apathy toward politics. In other words, you might be more aware of the things that politics can help in your community, and maybe you care a little bit more. One of the interesting things that when I read the chapter was your religious beliefs during adolescence. Here's a quote again from your book. Adolescence is an important time for spiritual questioning, doubting, and creating. Religious adolescents are less likely to rebel, less likely to engage in negative behavior, and more likely to be community involved. I think that's pretty interesting. The interesting thing to me is that it's expected that you would go through and self-evaluate your religious beliefs. You don't just take on, the beliefs of people around you. You have to figure out if they are what you believe also. And then these characteristics of religious adolescence are kind of interesting. And I thought this was interesting. Developments in all three domains, your moral, political, and religious, reflect the underlying growth of cognitive abilities and the shift from concrete to more abstract reasoning that characterizes the adolescent transition. Especially in this chapter, it kind of went over how moving from concrete thinking to more abstract helps in the transition process, helps with identity, and helps in all the ways that adolescents are growing and changing.